So we are back for part 2 or 3 or however many times I cut this up into different segments, but good to have my awesome friend Dennis Mostyn with us again. And we're going to continue with his story. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off, which I'd like you to talk to us about your transition into Bible college and kind of the experience of Bible college, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. I was living in Los Angeles area, and I had been in church about 10 years. I was going to a church down there, and I've been there 3 years, and my wife and I were married for 2 years. I had always wanted to go to Bible school. I felt that I really needed it. Even though I'd been in church, I'd read the Bible, I knew things, but I had some things to unlearn and some things to learn. So Brother Dugas had mentioned, of course, he recommended Stockton. And I had been to at least one other Bible school for a day up at CBC when I was in Oregon. And I just decided to go to Stockton. And it just so happened that he was getting ready to go back to Stockton as somebody that would take over the night school. And I didn't go there when he took over. I went there about a year later or the next year. And so about 1987 is when I went to Bible school. And I wanted to just go there like I had, no knowledge of the Bible. I wanted to just be a clean slate. And it was a great time because the teachers were the best staff they probably ever had at Stockton, the years that I went to Bible school. And I think it was Brother Mostyn that told me, it's not always where you go to Bible school, it's when you go to Bible school. So I really, I committed to going for 4 years. I met with Brother Haney about maybe a few months before the Bible school started. And I told him, I'm thinking about going to Bible school. And he just kind of roped me in, and said, well, you need to do it, and you got to get here. And we'll make it worth your while, that kind of thing. And so it was that year I started. And my wife worked at insurance company. She worked at AAA, and she got training there as a legal secretary. She started out as a secretary, and then they asked her if she would like to work in the legal department. And so she worked there for like 2 years as a legal secretary, and she's still working in that legal field now, so that was good training cool. for her.
Yeah.
I went to work right away for a painter because I couldn't, I wanted to get a sales job with the local trash company. And I'd already called them twice, and they told me they didn't have salespeople. So I was driving down the street one day going one of these painting jobs, and it was just exhausting me, going to school and then going to paint. Sometimes I'd be locked in a bank vault all night long and get out at 5 a.m. And because we were painting commercial buildings, and I'd be alone. And anyway, so going home one day, I see a trash container, same company that I called. And I said, God, why can't you get me a job? I've been in this business for like 3 or 4 years now. And it came to me, call them again. So I called them, and they said, come in tomorrow, talk to us, tell us what you can do for us. And so I ended up working for that company the whole 4 years I was in Bible school.
That's cool.
And it was great job. I went to work at 1 o'clock, and sometimes I never went back to the office because I was in outside sales. I told them how much I wanted, and they gave me much more than I asked for. Yeah, and they gave me a lot more commission.
That's awesome.
And they actually gave me a pretty good, assignment that guaranteed a really good commission. So between my wife working and that, we made it through. We always rented a house. We never did rent an apartment there in Bible school. We always had a really nice house, and it was a wonderful experience. Made a lot of friends that I still have. And of course, the teachers at the time, Brother Seagraves, Brother Dugas, Brother Odell, Brother Mostyn, Brother Putnam, Brother Yaden, Sister Myrick, Brother Rash, Like I say, it was a really, really great time. There hasn't been a time before or since that was so good. So I got my money's worth there.
Who is your favorite teacher, or couple
Well,
teachers that you just like
of course,
really
yeah,
latched on?
Brother Dugas, of course, my father-in-law was, I would say he was probably, uh, my favorite. I love to listen to him and his stories, but I also loved Brother Seagraves was probably the very best teacher. I mean, that I can remember. And Sister Haney, Sister Olive Haney, was a great teacher. And she taught several classes, but she taught Old Testament survey, New Testament survey my freshman year. And she just had so many stories about early days of Pentecost that really made it worthwhile. But it's very hard to say who the favorite. They were so good. All of them
I
were
figured.
so good. Yeah, Ron, it was just because I think about, the different teachers that they had so much experience. I believe every one of them had pastored, and they were great, great educators. And so it was really good experience for me. I enjoyed it.
What was the biggest takeaway, would you say, from Bible college? Kind of what stood out or impacted you the most as you continued in ministry?
Yeah, I think that the idea of, making contacts, making friends helped me quite a bit. That was a good takeaway. I did remove the dross from the silver. I like to look at it that way. The Bible says that if you remove the dross from the silver, you'll bring forth a vessel for the finer. In other words, those things that I had to unlearn were done there. And we had a class there, the Signs and Wonders class, and we didn't just talk about it. See, that's the thing about Bible school. I made a statement one time, I can't wait to get out of Bible school so I can start reading the Bible again. Because there's so many other things to read and so many things that you enjoy some of them, you don't enjoy others, and some of them you just have to take. But the Signs and Wonders class that Brother Seagraves and Brother Dugas taught was 1 hour of teaching and 1 hour of practicing the gifts of the Spirit. And that was probably the greatest impact, really long range. But like I said, of course, the camaraderie, with the other students and that sort of thing. I wasn't on campus because I was married. I was living off campus, but and also getting to hear some of the preaching. All the staff were great preachers, and then we had other preachers come through that were, some of them were really outstanding, memorable teachers. So that was great.
What really stands out to me is you talked about Brother Dugas and Seagraves teaching the Signs and Wonders class.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of blows my paradigm just a little bit, because my thought of them, and I know this is true, but my thought of them just was purely that they were intellectuals, right? I never would have associated them with signs and wonders, spiritual gifts. So that's really neat that they were involved in that type of ministry too. So.
Yeah, they were very much, that was really where they shined. I mean, Brother Dugas, of course, they all ended up getting master's degrees, and they started that when I was there. They started going to school for that, and they went to Western Seminary. And so they were all, and we think of a master's degree, a bachelor's degree is really basically just learning how to learn, learning how to study. You get the basics of it, and that was all important, learning how to study. The Greek that I took, Sister Myrick, that helped me quite a bit. Brother Dugas and Brother Seagraves, even though they were very great educators, they had more fun with the gifts of the Spirit than anything. They just shined at it. They loved it, and it was a great experience being with that, being in there.
It's so funny because, like I said, it just blows my paradigm. And I knew from talking to you about Brother Dugas, teaching and being active in the gifts, but I had no idea about Brother Seagraves until this moment right now.
Yeah, Brother Seagraves, his teaching was wonderful. It was great. It was just always disappointed when the class was over. I recommend Bible school to anybody that feels like, I'm not going to say that it's a requirement for ministry or anything like that, but if somebody feels it, then they need to go, because it will broaden your it just broadens everything, so you get worldwide connections, you get a worldwide idea. You may be a little bit foggy about your ministry, and we know we're called to the world, but we have to narrow it down. We have to focus it. And Bible school, to me, helps us to focus it. We hear what other people are going to do, and we hear what other people want to do and what they feel called to be. And, we kind of consider that, bounce it off, our own ideas of what we want to do. I just wanted to live for God and be the best. I wanted to do something to earn my reward, so I really feel like I was called to Bible school, and thereby I was enabled to really have a ministry that I probably never would have had if I didn't go to Bible school.
Yeah, well, and I kind of feel like not going to Bible school, I learned some lessons the hard way many years into my ministry.
Yeah.
Because not everything is as black and white as some people teach it. And I think Bible school sometimes challenges you to think, more critically and be more open, I guess, to different ideas and stuff. So,
right.
So you go to Bible college. It was amazing. What was the next step in your ministry there?
While I was in Bible school, I got recruited to work for Tupelo Children's Mansion, and Brother Odell was instrumental in this. Brother Odell, he called me in his office one day and told me that they were going to be that Tupelo was looking to our school to maybe hire some people, and Brother Drury was behind this. And I didn't know anybody at Tupelo. I didn't know Brother Drury at the time, but they knew Brother Odell, and they asked him for recommendations. So he recommended me to be maybe the administrator of a field rep program where they're going to have 4 field reps travel the 4 corners of the United States, 4 sections, and somebody was going to coordinate that. So I told him I'd be very excited to interview for that. And so he said, well, you're going to preach on Friday next week, you and another Brother Glenn Seckler, and the representative from Tupelo will be in the audience, and that will be your audition. That will be your interview. So anyway, what happened was I went home and I told my wife about it, and she wasn't really that excited about me being the administrator, but she said that traveling sounds good, the 4 people traveling around the country. So I told Brother Odell I was more interested in that, and he said, well, great, they need at least a couple of people for that, from here. So I'll put you down for that. So we preached, both of us, me and Glenn Seckler, were both were offered the job the next day. On Saturday, Brother Burton, who was in charge of the development department or the fundraising department. And so we were going to be representatives and fundraisers. And I was, we didn't know what part of the country we would travel in, but the West Coast and the Western United States was the least touched area for Tupelo. There had been people traveling through the South and through the Northeast and even through the Midwest. And so I just kept my mouth shut, and everybody else picked other areas. And I said, I'll take the West, and I love the West. Of course, I was living in California. And so it turned out that our area was the number one. And at first, I started in Louisiana. I didn't have Texas, but within a few months, I got Texas thrown into that. And that turned out to be the promised land, the gold mine. Right. So that was really great, And so we did it for 3 years. I had services. I call it I preached, because I really did preach, but we preached in a way that would benefit the Tupelo Children's Mansion, not as an evangelist kind of thing. But I preached in 550 churches in 3 years. And that was a wonderful, and I learned so much without even trying to learn, just learned a lot, learned how to handle myself with people. It was very fun because, my wife and I were together every day. Of course, after about 2 years of being with me every hour of the day, got a little old, so every once in a while she would tell me, how hard it was to be with me all the time. We joke about that now, but really, we had our daughter was about 2.5, Ashley was, when we started. And it was a great experience for her. And she's going back now to a lot of those churches that we went to as a kid. She's going back there as a missionary now to the Middle East. And so it's a wonderful thing. They're the people we met and the churches that we were able to go to. That was a great thing. So that was my next step. That was 3 years. I got to work with Brother Steve Drury, who is an amazing person, one of the greatest men that I know, as far as somebody that is very focused, very, very good businessman. And he was the mansion. When we raised money, it's very, very unique fundraising. I don't know if it's like this in other areas, but with the church, you have to have a trust. You have to have people buying into it, and they don't buy into necessarily the institution, they buy into the person. And so when we had Steve Drury there, he was there ultimately for 24 years, the head of the mansion. And he negotiated the price of the bananas for the Tupelo Children's Mansion. I mean, that's how he had his fingers in everything, And so he took care of the money. And it was very easy to go out there and raise money for a good cause. And the children, it was very emotionally satisfying. So it was a wonderful time. 3 years we did that. And till our second daughter was born. And we still traveled for 6 months after that. And then it was on to our next stage. We left Tupelo after 3 full years.
So before we get there, a couple questions. First, could you, just for the sake of those who may not know what Tupelo's Children's Mansion is, kind of explain what they do, and then I'll have one more follow-up question.
Okay. Well, it's a group home for children, for abused, neglected, many times abandoned children, literally between the age of like maybe just a couple of years old and 18 years old. And the children come there from all over the country. Any one of our churches is able to bring people there. And while I was there, we had actually a judge in Texas that was familiar with Tupelo. I don't think he was from one of our churches, but he would actually send kids that weren't even connected to our churches because it was such a successful place. I believe at the time it was the largest privately funded children's home in the United States, and there was room for 98 children. I think it was about 22 acres, 11 buildings, something like that, beautiful buildings. Everything was first class there. And it was a children's home and many of the children that were there, after a few years, Brother Drury began an adoption agency, and so they were able to be adopted out to permanent homes. But it was sponsored by churches and individuals, and so the budget at the time was way over $2 million a year that I was there, and it was up to us to raise a good part of that budget, not me personally, but the field reps. That was the idea, and there was also regular sponsors, churches that the children went out. I didn't bring the children with us. We just went out ourselves to churches, and we had, at the time, Brother Kent Russell, you may have met. He's works with Brother Drury now in stewardship, and he comes to our camp every year. Mm-hmm. He did my schedule for about a year and a half, and he set up all the meetings. And sometimes we'd fill him in here and there. And they had some other people, Mary Odom and some others that did the scheduling. And I began to, get a little antsy because the schedule wasn't full. So they decided to go ahead and let me do my own scheduling. In fact, all the field reps, eventually after about a year and a half, we had to do our own scheduling. So it made it real work then,
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a ton of work.
It was a lot of work. And I really respected what they had done, getting services for us. I don't know, maybe I complained too much about not having services at one point because I got a reputation of being a gripe, but I'll tell you what, it was great working with these people, and the children, the changed lives that the satisfaction was just overwhelming. They wanted us to be around the kids as much as we could, but we were only there about 2 weeks a year, maybe 3, but I'd say 2 full weeks, I'd say. We went for the board meeting every year, and the board meeting was, I think it was 28 district superintendents and the secretaries. They didn't all come, but there were probably maybe 15 to 20 that would come. And Brother Tenney would be there all the time. Brother Lumpkin was the president at the time. And so these people would come and got to know them. Every once in a while, Brother Urshan would be there. Just he didn't have anything to do with the running of the place. But then also every once in a while, like Stanley Chambers was there one time. I got to meet him, which was great for me to be able to meet him. And then being able to sit on these board meetings, with these superintendents, I got to know personally many of the superintendents of the UPC. And the secretaries, and I've actually preached in several of their churches, and so
that's cool.
Yeah, and so then just the whole the whole idea of being part of something, we got treated very well. These churches we went to treated us really special. And it was a great period of time. We traveled from Texas to California, up to British Columbia and Alberta, Canada, and all the way over to Montana. We covered Montana and Wyoming, and then we stopped at Nebraska there. And so we didn't do the Midwest. Every once in a while, if we were going through the Midwest, we kind of trade with another field rep, give them some services in our areas, and we'd get some in theirs. So I preached in a few churches in Illinois and Iowa, or somewhere in the Midwest there, a few of them. And then, but I was in so many churches in Louisiana and Texas. I was in 180 churches in Texas alone at that time.
So cool.
Yeah, it was really great. And I thank Brother Odell for helping me, suggesting, and I really do think that at that time, I don't know anything about what's happening now, but at that time, they were very happy with the people that came from Stockton. Several people came from Stockton, several people from my class. I think for my class in the next year, 5 or 6 people ended up working there. And then when after I was done being a field rep, some of the field reps I hired since then were from Stockton, so they put out a good product.
So the moral of the story is you want to work for Tupelo, go to CLC.
Yeah.
So you mentioned preaching at all these churches,
Yeah.
and you preached in a way that benefited the children. I'm just curious, like what most churches asked you to do. Like, were you just the preacher for that night and you got the service, or did they give you a 15-minute spot, or what did it look like to go to all the different churches?
Most of the churches, I was the speaker for the morning or the evening or the midweek or whatever. There were literally only about 2 churches, maybe 3, that I wasn't. That I can only remember a couple of churches that gave me like 10 minutes, but that was good. Like Brother Kilgore, it was kind of interesting going to his church, because when I got there, we had to set up our trailer and that type of thing. We had a 32-foot travel trailer in a big van, and Brother Kilgore was out there helping me set up my trailer and pulling out the cord and plugging it in. And I said, Brother Kilgore, you've got people to do this. I'm the one who does this, he said. I'm the people. Really? And then he told me that, it just so happens that Brother Morton Bustard was preaching that day. And I knew him a little bit. I'd, been with him before. And so he preached, and they gave me about 15 minutes of the service. And, but most of the time, it was given over to me. And sometimes we had some really good services. We had some healings and some different things happen. We tried to pass out sponsor cards. And I would say that most of the pastors allowed us to do this, but I got an insight as to the type of churches that we have. This is really a pastor-run organization, as far as even some of these other ministries like our Bible schools and the children's home and the boys ranch and that sort of thing. They're dependent on the pastors leaving it open so we can go to their churches, and
right.
And so we respected that, and it was we got treated very well by our pastors. It's and every one of them was very the church that we went to, because if they didn't like Tupelo, or they didn't have any, if they just didn't care, and we didn't go there, they wouldn't accept it. We would actually invite ourselves, not so much as saying that, but we would ask, to come.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they said yes. The only thing was the scheduling was not always ideal. They had something else going on. So there were a few people that didn't matter when we wanted to come, they had somebody else there. One of them, I finally just said, well, I'll tell you what, I will, it's the first of the year. I will wrap my whole year around you. Tell me when I can come. And they said, well, the fact is, we just don't want you to come, So we learned that, and hey, I didn't really realize until after I was a pastor how, that does happen. Not so much that we wouldn't have them, but, we get a lot of things going on. So it's not always the ideal time.
Well, and there's a lot of ministries to support as a pastor too. There's Tupelo's, right. There's Lighthouse Ranch for Boys, there's all your missionaries, there's men's ministry, ladies ministry. So I could see why
everybody's got their hand out, Yeah. And so that was always the challenge in fundraising.
Including us pastors, pay your tithes.
That's right. And then some.
Right. Tithes and offerings. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Um, well, cool. Well, so after Tupelo, what was in store for the Mostyn family?
Well, we decided we wanted to start a church in a big city, and we wanted to be inner city pastors. And so we went back to California, went to Los Angeles, and we drove around there. And it was pretty much right after the Rodney King. It was 1990, 93. I mean, 1993, and it was right after the Rodney King riots. And we had lived there for 3 years. I had, and it had changed so much, and that didn't really matter. I mean, they trashed. I don't know. Most people don't know this, but they had burned down literally 1,600 buildings in that riot with Rodney King. Yeah. And what they didn't burn down, they trashed the buildings with graffiti. So I'm not talking about the entire area, but we just didn't feel it, so we went to Chicago where I grew up, and we decided to go ahead and move there and start a church there in the city of Chicago. And so Chicago is very different than most cities that I've lived in before. It's different in the fact that there's several neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are pretty solid. The people in the city, everybody that works for the city has to live in the city. So there's defined neighborhoods. Some of them are good neighborhoods, some are bad neighborhoods. You stay out of the bad neighborhood and you're going to be all right. No guarantees if you venture into the bad neighborhoods. So we decided to start a church on the north side. We wrote some people there. One of the presbyters that really was interested in people coming. And I learned also that it's kind of interesting. There's not everybody's excited about somebody coming to a church, to a city to start a church. In fact, some pretty high up people try to discourage us. Why don't you find a nice little town to go to? Why don't you find a church that's already going, and pastors retiring, that sort of thing. So the discouragement started before we even started the church, and then when we went there, I will tell you this, we didn't get a lot of encouragement from the local district. We did from the leadership of the district. Brother Breithoft was very excited. There was a brother named Brother Lucas that was very interested in churches in the city. Some of them, Chicago is the enemy because they get all the money, and, Illinois is a very rural state. And so we have a lot of churches in Illinois, hundreds of churches, probably over 300 churches. And most of them are in very rural areas, small towns. And they're great people, but, the big cities, like, it's kind of like a lost cause, There aren't that many churches there.
How many, when you went to go start the church there, how many churches were there, or if any, in Chicago?
In the city, there were literally two other churches in the city of Chicago, two churches. There were about 25 in the area. And some of them that you may have heard were in Chicago were 25, 30 miles away, But the Chicago area, it's still a metro area. So some of the metro missionaries that we'd go around saying, hey, this guy's there. Well, yeah, he's there, but he's, 40 miles away from where we are, So we could have gone metro missionary. At the time, Brother Jack Cunningham was the head of the Home Missions Department. And Brother Cunningham had actually been associate pastor in Chicago. In fact, the church that I ultimately pastored, he had been co-pastor of that church at one time. And he was very favorable of starting churches in Chicago. So I could have gone, but I'd been traveling for 3 years. And we were just ready to be on site, And so Brother Breithoff, when I called him, he said, we're not going to meet until you're going to be here for 3 or 4 months before the board even meets next time. But he said, go ahead and start the church as if you already have permission, as if you already have approval, because you're going to get approval. And Brother Breithaupt was one of the greatest men that I personally have ever been with. Just a great man of wisdom. And so we went ahead and started the church and actually started having services and stuff before we even got approval but we started in the north side of the city. We were about 3.5 miles from Brother Goddard's church, and and then another church was about 3.5 miles away from him on the other side. So the north side is where all these churches were. And Brother Goddard was our closest neighboring pastor. And then Brother Sanders had taken a church that had been an established church for several years.
Is this the same Brother Goddard that you originally went to?
Yes. Yeah. We were about 3.5 miles from him. Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, when we left Tupelo and we went to Chicago, we went to his church and became members for about 3 or 4 months at his church, and that was a good experience. We love Brother Goddard and his family. And that church, what's that?
Well, I was going to ask it, with the churches being so close, was there any conflict, or was everybody pretty much like, hey, we're all in this together? And
no conflict whatsoever. None. I had a brother that called me one day, and he said he wanted to start a church in Chicago. And he told me where he wanted to be. And I said, that would be a great location for a church. We need a church there. He called me back less than about 2 minutes later and said, it's less than a mile from your church where I want to be. And he said, I can't even Google it. It's so close, and it just won't even register. It's like there. I said, well, we'll never see each other. There's at least 100 and whatever thousand people between you and me, so wow. We never thought of it that way. I just remember there was actually 3 churches. I just remember another church that was in the city limits at the time. It's now right outside of the city limits. Still considered a Chicago church. I think they just moved back into the city, as a matter of fact. But that would be Brother Sagel. And I'm quoting him now, and he said this, and I've used this several times. I want to give him credit for it. He said, if you're ethical, you can be across the street. If you're not, you can't be far enough away. And that's the way I look at it, So yeah, I grew up a Catholic. There were Catholic churches every 2 blocks in Chicago, maybe every 3 blocks. I think they had a certain number of families per parish. It was way over 3,000 families, and so, but, there's a lot more Catholics than there are Pentecostals, but anyway, I believe that, all of our pastors were ethical. I think if you live long enough, you're going to have somebody leave a church and come to your church, and you're going to have somebody leave your church and go to somebody else's church. And you got to be a big boy about it, kind of thing, and not take it personally, and hope the best for those people.
Right.
And so we didn't have many transfers. We only had one the whole time I was there. And every time anybody came, I would call the other pastor or tell the people to go back there and say, if you don't like it there, you're not going to like it here. We preach the same thing. We're the same church, same kind of church, and but many of them did go back, work things out. But we did get one transfer the whole time. It was a lady that lived literally a block away from our church, and I had no idea.
Oh, funny.
She lived that, and the other church moved, and she didn't want to move out of the city, so she came to our church, and she was a great blessing to our church, you know. And but you know, these big cities, they're just unreached, you know. Even you go to Houston, we have something like 50 churches in Houston. It's not evangelized, you know. It's not reached.
Right.
So we got to get off the concept of, you know, the territorial kind of thinking. As far as I know, UPC doesn't have any mileage restriction for churches to be so far from each other. There may be some unwritten rules. And I know there are, and I know there's problems, you know, because a lot of times people want to start a church right in the middle of, you know, 5 existing churches. You know, I've seen that, you know, more than once, and you have too. But, you know, if they're ethical, they can be there, and there's people to reach that we'll never run into the same people, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and nobody belongs to us really, but the people in Brother Goddard's church were so fiercely loyal to him. I'm telling you that I could, you know, if I would have gone over there and tried to get people to come, they wouldn't, you know. And we never even thought about that. We never thought about making a friendship with somebody for that purpose, you know.
Right.
And so, I think we had a good bunch there, you know, good mix. So we were there. We started that church in my apartment. Very soon we moved to a city park district.
So it was just you and your family?
It was me and my family, and then my brother and his family, his wife and son. And we moved into a park district. And I looked and looked, you know, for places to meet, and some of them turned us down. But this park district, I happened to have gone to school with the superintendent of the park district's cousin. And when I got there, I said, you know, are you this family? And he said, that's my cousin. And I said, we wanted to rent. And he pulled out a book and he said, when do you want to be here? I said, Sundays and Wednesdays. He said, okay. He said, I'll charge you $10 a service, and you can pay me every 3 months. And he says, you can have that room upstairs. And I went up there. That room would easily seat 150 people or more.
That's so
and it was
cool.
A great big room that opened up. The whole one wall was glass, opened up to Lake Michigan, a beach there on the lake. Yeah. So it was a beautiful setting. We ended up moving to the music room down the hall, which had a stage, like a platform almost, and we're able to leave our musical instruments there. For about a year, I carried the PA and the keyboard up the stairs. I can't even lift the thing anymore. But for over a year, I think we carried it up and down, you know, twice a week. And but by the time we were able to leave that building, we had keys to the rooms, and we were just part of the, you know, part of the woodwork of the place, you know. So that was a great blessing, and we were there for about almost 3 years in that setting, and we grew. And then, but we couldn't have a Sunday night service, so we found a church across town where we were able to rent a room, a beautiful chapel in a United Church. It was a congregational church, I believe, United Church of Christ. That was it. And we got favor with that pastor. He gave us a room for $100 a month, and we had keys to the building. We never saw anybody else. We left our stuff set up, and we had a separate congregation there. These churches never got to be big. I don't want you to think that we had these great big congregations, but some of the people ended up coming to Sunday morning at the Park District and then Sunday night there.
Mm-hmm.
and then some of them just came Sunday night or one or the other. But that was a wonderful. I mean, we really more or less had two churches going, there, and so the parking situation was a lot better at the church we were in. It had a parking lot and that sort of thing. But it's not easy starting a church in a big city. It's just very, very difficult, as you know. It's just one of those things. But we in Chicago, we'd go out and pass out tracts. Sometimes we'd have 4 or 5 visitors, sometimes more.
Mm.
We had visitors almost every week, and we baptized people. We had some really great people come in. And then after we'd been there about 3 years, Brother Sanders, who pastored the church that Brother Anderson had started in Chicago, he decided to leave the city. He didn't know where he was going to go. He had no idea. He just was going to leave. And he got up and he resigned his church. Well, we heard about it. And when I called him and asked him what his intentions were, and I said, well, are you going to stay? And he said, no, we're going to leave. I said, well, who's going to take your church? And he said, I don't have anybody in mind. Mm. And believe it or not, it wasn't that easy to get a pastor to come to the inner city of Chicago at that time. So I said, well, have you ever thought of our churches merging? And he said, well, yeah. I said, I thought of that, but I didn't think you'd want to do that because you're the founding pastor of your church. I said, that doesn't mean anything to me. Mm-hmm. I said, but the problem was he had just sold his building. There was a situation where he had to sell the building, and it was just a bad situation with the tax department in Chicago. He had to pay some taxes, some back taxes. And so a group from Brooklyn Tabernacle, they weren't really from there. They had been one of the pastors there, came and bought the church and rented it back to him. And he'd been renting it back for about a year by the time he left. And they told me we could move into that building, but they were going to triple the rent. And so I told him, I said, well, you can tell them we won't even have one service there. So they doubled the rent and we stayed. We stayed for about 6-7 months. And
did you win? Maybe you did if it was Chicago. So.
You know what? Yeah, it was not a good situation. Very hostile, rental situation, and it wasn't a good building. But anyway, we made the best of it. But I think we were there maybe a year or two. I think we stayed there actually. And one day he came and told us that we had 30 days to get out of there. The pastor did. And so we left and we got another building. All together, I was in Chicago. My wife and I and our 3 daughters were there for over 15 years, about 16 years, I believe it was, pastoring that church. So.
Did your daughters get involved in any capacity in ministry?
Well, they I wouldn't say they did. They were pretty young at the time. They didn't really, they probably sang like, worship singing and that sort of thing. But they didn't get involved in ministry. I don't even think they taught or anything like that. I think they were very young. Ashley might have taught with my wife a little bit. We had a kind of a Sunday school on Wednesday night for the kids, but I can't remember them being real involved in the ministry there, in Chicago. We had some really good people in the church. We won some people that were very faithful and had a good group. But I think it was hard on the kids. The city church situation is always a little bit removed, from the rest of the district. It's just a little bit, it's just, especially that district, it was hard on the kids, and that, they went to youth camp and that sort of thing. I think Ashley received the Holy Ghost at the youth camp, and then Macy got it in a revival we had there. And then Reagan got the Holy Ghost later when I was traveling as an evangelist, more or less. She got it in Indiana, and at church there in Portage, Indiana. She was 11. I think Macy was 7. I think Ashley was about 7. And Reagan got baptized when she was about 8, I believe, and they got the Holy Ghost at 11. So it was just a thrilling thing. Several times the Dugases came and visited us, and he would preach sometimes for a week or two, really, and so we had several visiting ministers. We had some good concerts there. We had the Pettigos come.
How cool.
Yeah. The night the Pettigos came, we had our dentist came and got saved. He got the Holy Ghost that night. And yeah, and then we had, let's see, we had Lance Appleton there 2 times at our church. It was a great church, great group of people.
So obviously you didn't stay there forever because you're in Portland now. What kind of prompted you to transition into another role?
Well, here's what happened. After we've been there for that many years, Brother Kuhn called me from St. Louis. He was trying to raise some money for the ministries, the different ministries. All the different ministries were under Home Missions at the time, all the ethnic ministries. There were literally 40 of them.
Wow.
And they really had no source of income. Yeah, we had 40 different ethnic ministries, everything from Alaska Flying Mission to Gypsy Ministries and Amish Ministries. And so they didn't have any fundraising. So he began to talk to Brother Drury, and he asked him, how did you raise money for Tupelo? And he said, well, we had field reps, out there, constantly. So he said, well, we'd like to train some field reps, to do that for Home Missions. He said, who trained your people? And the gentleman that trained us had already passed away. So Brother Drury recommended me. He said, get Brother Mostyn to train your field reps. He did a great job. And so he called me and asked me if I would come and consider training the field reps, So I told him I think that would be wonderful. I appreciated him calling me, and I went down there and we had a training session. 5 people were there. It was really the staff of Home Missions, and it was like a 2-day training thing. And they were really deciding whether they were going to do this or not, so at the end of those 2 days, Brother Kuhn said, thank you. We're going to call you back when we make up our mind to do this, So just a few months later, he called me to come back and train 2 brothers to do the field rep, And so I came back and did that. And I wasn't really sure that it was going to work because these were a couple of evangelists that were going to more or less do this in their spare time between revivals, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I told Brother Kuhn, I said, I think you need somebody that's going to be dedicated to it. I'm not so sure it's going to work, So he said, well, we'll give it a try. Well, I don't know if it was a month or 2 months later, he called me back and asked me if I would, said it wasn't working, and asked me if I would do it. And, with the thought of eventually training other people to do it and have 4 people like we have with Tupelo. And so I told him I'd think about it. Well, the church was, we were pastoring at the time. But it wasn't long before, one by one, people started coming and telling me that they were moving. One of our best family was going to move to Seattle. The dentist had just inherited a big piece of land in Colorado. He was going to retire and move to, he was just he wasn't that old. But his mother had passed away. She was a multimillionaire and left him all this money. And so he was moving. Some other people going to move to Australia. Anyway, so I thought, where's Brother Kuhn's phone number? Where is that? I got to call him back, But really, what happened was we had a Tupelo reunion down in Little Rock, Arkansas. And my wife and I went to it with our kids. And Brother Drury said, I want to talk to you. And Brother Drury, by this time, was at headquarters. He had left Tupelo. He'd been at headquarters for maybe a year, running the stewardship department. And he said to me, they really need you to take this job at Tupelo or at Home Missions. I remember what he said. He said, you could be a real hero, He said, they need it. And he thought I could do it. And he said, he said, you can always pastor again, but you might never get another chance to do this and make a big difference, with this end of things. So that's pretty much what pushed me over the edge. I went back and called Brother Kuhn, told him I'd do it. And right about that time, the church that we were renting a beautiful, big church seat, about 300, and it had some problems, it was kind of, it had some repairs that needed to be done. But they told us they were selling the building and that we had to be out of there by April. And so we found somebody that was interested in taking the church and had a couple of meetings with them. And the way things worked out, we were literally there till April before I actually went to St. Louis. I started in January, but most of it was planning and getting things ready and that type of thing. And so, I did that for 2 years. And right about that time, the economy was getting bad. It was 2007. Harder to get services because people were, quitting their Sunday night service and having one service. Some churches didn't even have midweek, and you couldn't get them to give you a midweek service a lot of times. Whereas with Tupelo, we could talk them into having service on Tuesday or Thursday and changing things, Now, if I had 2 services a week, it was pretty good, So that got to be kind of bad. So anyway, it didn't work out. There was a lot of reasons why, but at the end of 2 years, I had never moved to St. Louis. I'd always stayed there in the Chicago area. And, but, we were waiting to see if it would work there, in St. Louis and ultimately do this full time. It was a full-time thing. I was traveling, but I didn't, I traveled quite a bit within the Midwest at the time, and a little bit in Texas, a little bit in Louisiana, and even had some services out here in Oregon for Home Missions. But that didn't work out. So things, right about then is when things started getting, bad with the economy. So that was a big trial, giving up my church, and then now I'm nobody. Now I'm just out there, There was a lot of reluctance of having somebody like me travel. I used to joke that I was a secret agent, and we actually called our ministry Mission Invest, and we based it after Mission Impossible. The brochure and everything. We kind of had that And I also said, if I'm captured or killed, you will disavow all knowledge of my existence, So I was a secret agent. Brother Drury really tried to help me with that, and give me a little more visibility and that sort of thing. But, he was doing some other things. So he didn't have that going. He didn't have that ability. But Brother Kuhn had a lot of great abilities that I looked at him as kind of like a general, that took in everything that was possible and tried to do it, even though it wasn't always easy. For instance, we couldn't we had to get permission to go to every district, one of the reasons was, here's why they wanted me to travel, or wanted somebody to travel. The reason was because 40% of our churches don't give anything at all to home missions. Not a dollar, not a dime.
Wow.
And so that means 60% of the churches do. So they kind of sold it to the general board as, we're going to have somebody go to this 40%, Well, I told Brother Kuhn when I started, I said, this is not going to necessarily work if we only go to the 40% that are not giving, They're not going to give because I show up, and tell them they should give.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do a mix of, we have to see a friendly face every now and then, and somebody's going to have to pay for this. But so that was a challenge, because we were trying to get people that were not used to giving,
It's like trying to sell sweaters at the equator, is what you're saying?
Just about, yeah. And it was interesting, and it was also an education to me, the difference between raising money for the Tupelo Children's Mansion and the home missions, because once again, we had home missions directors that were there for maybe 4 years, 8 years. So you didn't have that stability of a person being given to, And the psychology of giving is, like I said, we personify it. We personify an institution.